Born that way. I was born that way. Good morning, everyone, and to those online. We welcome you to class today. I probably should have changed the title. It doesn't look too good, does it? Cain kills Abel, and what about wives? Good thing I didn't have a question mark there, right? You know, that would have been bad. Well, let's begin with a word of prayer. Okay. Heavenly Father, be with us. Watch over us this day. And as Pastor Allersmeyer reminded us, let's go to the party. That party of Jesus when he comes again and all this other stuff is all gone. But be with us this day. Holy Spirit, open our hearts and our minds to your word. Let it enrich us and empower us and be with us. For it's in your name that we all pray. Amen. And if you haven't been to church yet, you got in store for a pretty good sermon. You know, Pastor Allersmeyer. It's really, really nice. You know. All right, let's get going then on our journey through Genesis chapters 1 to 11. All right, our lesson today, we'll look at the first murder recorded in Scripture, Cain killing Abel. Some very important ideas in the text will help us understand what led to the murder and shows us a wonderful connection to the gospel. And we will deal with one of the tricky little questions that skeptics offer as a challenge to the Bible. And that's why we're going to bring that up about who married whom, because that's a question they always ask, and they think that they got us, on that one. But we'll see. All right, so Genesis 4, verses 1 through 15. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Just a little sidelight. I have gotten a man. Scholars think that refers back to Genesis 3:15. That Eve thought that she had that one who would crush Satan's head, in that little phrase. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and they were in the field. Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Okay? And there we are. Well, there's room right up in here. That's okay. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. What is the historical context of the passage? You want to pass that back to them, please? What's the historical context? After the fall. And? Murder, yeah. Well, it's after the fall and a little more after that. What happened right after the fall? They're kicked out of the garden. All right, so Adam and Eve have sinned against God and have been expelled from the Garden of Eden. And there was an angel guard, right? So they couldn't go back in to that garden. So which son was born first? Cain. All right, he was born before Abel. And what were the occupations of the two sons? Cain was a what? Farmer. Abel?
Shepherd.
Okay. Abel was a shepherd and Cain was a farmer. What did Cain bring as an offering to the Lord?
The fruits of the ground.
A little more specific, because I want you to be specific here, which is going to get into what we're going on here. Wow.
Produce from the ground that he grew.
You're getting closer. You're getting closer. He brought an offering, and it says, didn't it say some fruit of the ground?
Of
Doesn't
the
it?
fruit of the ground.
Yeah, just of the fruit of the ground. Just some fruit of the ground. Okay? Because when we look and see in terms of what did Abel bring as an offering, and you really see the distinction here already.
The firstborn of his flock.
And the fat portions. You know when you have steak or that and you got a little thing of fat on there? That's what you got to eat. And my wife says, no, you got to cut it off. It is so hard to cut off. You know? But the fat portions, meaning, and in essence, and we're going to look at this, you already know this, meaning the best. This is his best, okay? You got to remember that. Okay, how did God respond to the two offerings? With Cain's offering, how did he respond?
No regard for it.
No regard. But Abel's was, all right? So the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. And how did Cain respond to God's disfavor? He got all jacked out of shape, didn't he? He was angry and his face fell. Now, I don't exactly know what that face fell means, but I think it means he's kind of angry. You know, you can kind of tell when people are angry, right? How their face turns, you know?
Frowning, not smiling.
Yeah, and they're not smiling, yeah. And what caution did God give to Cain? What's the caution? And he uses kind of a descriptive phrase when he gives the caution.
Sin is crouching at your door.
Sin is crouching at your door. Isn't that true? Crouching and ready to come in, isn't it? You know? God cautioned him to do the right thing and to ensure that sin did not rule over him. He says, Cain, you got to be careful here, buddy. You know, something's happening. Now, I find this interesting too, and I may have it in the outline someplace, but God was still talking to the people, wasn't he? He was still interacting with them. Wouldn't that be cool? You know? Of course, now we'd probably be scared out of our wits, right? You know, and everything else, but he did that. And how did Cain respond to God's warning? Well, he ignored the warning and chose to sin and murder his brother. Bob.
I had a thought just this morning as I was reading through this again about the two offerings, and it struck me that the one obviously from Abel was the proper sin offering. You know, a spotless lamb without blemish, with the fat portions, a blood sacrifice. And then I got thinking about the produce, and obviously it wasn't that type of sacrifice, but I can't help but wonder now, as I read through that again this morning, if there also wasn't a part of a self-righteousness on Cain's part in offering that, and that this was the work of my hands in this produce, not that he was thinking in terms of pleading to God for forgiveness forgiveness for his sins, but basically a display of, this is what I did, and this is for you.
Yeah. And also makes you wonder, why did they think they had to offer something to God? You know, there's some of that in there too. You know, thank you, Bob. All right, how did Cain respond to God's question about Abel's location? Thank you, Sophia. That's very good. You know, that's very good. See, she doesn't even have to talk, and we know what she's saying, just so, you know, kind of thing. He lied to God, and he said, I don't know where he is. You know, am I my brother's keeper? You know, famous words, right? And turned the questioning back to God. Okay? So I had to put that in there. You know, just a little humor for today. You know, words first murder, you're in big trouble now. Well, that's true. And how did God respond to Cain's sin? Did he just say, oh, that's all right, and let's go on and whatnot? Yeah, of course not. Cursed the ground so that it would not yield for Cain since he was a farmer. He says, you're not going to grow anything anymore. You're going to be what? A wanderer. And so Cain became what? The first nomad, right? In a sense. That kind of thing. God also condemned Cain to be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Okay? Cain responded by telling God that his punishment was too great, a form of asking for mercy. And then, you know, all of a sudden he gets a religion, in a sense, all right? And what did Cain fear would happen to him? He'd be killed. You know, now we're going to look at this later in lesson 2, but who would have killed him?
Siblings.
Pardon?
Siblings.
Siblings? Good. That anyone who found him would kill him. How did God demonstrate mercy to Cain? He marked him. Okay? Set a mark on him and promised to avenge sevenfold anyone who would take his life in revenge. And probably should state here right now, there are those who think that the mark was the color of his skin. And people, there's nothing in the text that says that. That's not. That's where some think that where the Negroid race came from. But it's not. Okay, so we'll squelch that here and there. We don't know what that mark was, you know, but there was something that people knew, you know, that God had done this and hands off, you know, kind of thing, right? So nothing racist in here at all. Was God still communicating to humans after the fall? Of course, the answer is yes. This is a prime example. Many people assert that God completely broke fellowship with man after the fall. This direct intervention on behalf of Cain shows God was still intimately involved with his creation despite their sin. All right? What parallels do you see in this account, in the account of the fall in Genesis 3? Do you see any similarities? Must be, otherwise I wouldn't have asked her, right?
Passing the blame.
The what?
Passing the blame.
Passing the blame. Give me some more. Other similarities that you see with Adam and Eve and the fall and Cain. Anything else?
Being sent away.
I didn't hear that.
Being sent away.
Being sent away. What else?
They're both cursed.
Both cursed. Good.
Rhetorical questions.
Rhetorical questions.
So God comes into the Garden of Eden and asks, where are you? He knows where they are. What have you done? He knows that too. He asks Cain the same question.
Of course, you know, men are a little slow, right? You know, and so kind of thing. Gwendolyn, did you have a comment?
God showed mercy to both of them.
Showed mercy to both of them. Okay. Good things here. Well, God warned both Adam and Canaan. These are some of the things that you had. Adam and Cain both willfully rebelled against God with full knowledge. God asked Adam and Cain about what they had done. Adam and Cain rejected their own responsibility. God cursed Adam and Cain, but did not carry out their punishment immediately. You know? And what was Cain's motive for killing his brother? Jealousy. Jealousy seems to be the best explanation based on the text. God had regard for Abel's offering and not Cain's, and Cain became jealous and angry. It didn't take long for sin to have its effect, right? You know? And you even see that, you know, it didn't take long for little babies to exhibit that sinful stuff either, does it? You put two babies in a crib with one toy, and you see it right away, don't you? You know?
Well, you know, that's a good point for original sin. You know, I remember when my kids were first born, when they were growing up, I never had to teach them to be bad. I had to teach them to be good. The bad part comes naturally.
Okay. Now, my two kids weren't like that. You
My
know?
sister had Barb helping you out.
No, it was the influence of the father. Because I was a strong leader. They didn't do that. But they learned a lot from their mother, let me tell you. You know? And I just better quit there and go on, right? Just a little humor. Okay, how would you summarize the main point of the passage? Here we go. Despite God's warning, Cain rebelled against God by killing his brother. But God was merciful to Cain, allowing him to live and protecting him from vengeance. Although we do not have specific details about how Cain and Abel knew that they were to offer sacrifices to God, or what that process looked like, still they knew it was expected. As the brothers brought their offerings, presumably to the same altar at the same time, Cain's sacrifice was rejected by God, and he likely became jealous of Abel's acceptance. As a result, Cain killed his brother and faced God's curse. Isn't that something, too, that you think about, even in today's world, how quickly Cain reacted and how violently he reacted? And don't you see that in our society today, how quickly people, you know, they go for the jugular vein just right away? You know, and doesn't it make you wonder sometimes how people are crazy, you know? But God's merciful to Cain by not taking his life and placing a mark on him so others would be afraid to take vengeance for Abel's murder. Cain was openly disobedient, and God judged his disobedience mercifully. This is another example of the intersection of God's justice and mercy that reminds us of the gospel. Even though our sin deserves to be punished, Jesus Christ willingly offered himself as the sacrifice to pay for our sin. Well, what is an acceptable sacrifice? Let's go to that part of our lesson. We don't have any information from the text on what was required by the sacrifices that were offered by Cain and Abel and others alive at the time. We do have a lot of information that can be used to infer that God may have required from those sacrifices. As God describes the sacrificial system in Leviticus, we see that the requirements for various sacrifices were given. Thousands of years later, as you look over the following questions, try to understand why it was that Cain was rejected by God and Abel was accepted. Okay, what are the difference between the two offerings described in Genesis 4, 1-5? Here we go. Well, Cain offered a grain, fruit of the ground offering, all right? Abel offered the firstborn of his flock and of the fat portions. And you see the difference right there, I think. You know, Cain offered some, Abel offered some good stuff, right? Abel offered the first, which demanded that he trust God to supply the rest of the herd, whereas Cain offered some of his harvest, not the first of his harvest. You see the difference there? If you do first fruits giving, you're giving off of the top, not knowing if you got anything, the rest coming. Do you see the difference there? Whereas we kind of, you just give God a little bit. Say, well, I better keep back some, because I just don't know. Whereas, Abel said, I'm going to give you the best and trust in God for the rest. Okay? I'm going to do that with my peas this year, Larry. I'm going to give God, I'll give you the best, God, if you give me the rest. And I've told you about my inability to raise peas, Leviticus chapter 2, let's go there. And look out how these offerings compare to Cain's and Abel's. So Leviticus 2, verses 1 and 2, then chapter 2, verse 14, and then chapter 4. Okay? Here we go. When anyone brings a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it, and bring it to Aaron's sons the priests. And he shall take from it a handful of the fine flour and oil with all its frankincense, and the priest shall burn this as its memorial portion on the altar of food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now, I think what's this important, see, some people think the reason Cain offering wasn't accepted because it wasn't of an animal. And therefore God said, I'm not going to, But in Leviticus, we see there were different types of offerings with different types of things. And, the grain offering was an acceptable offering to the Lord. All right, on to verse 14. If you offer a grain offering of first fruits to the Lord, you shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits, fresh ears roasted with fire, crushed new grain. Okay, and then let's go to chapter 4. Verses 27 through 31. If any one of the common people sins unintentionally in doing any of the things that the Lord's commandments ought not to be done and realizes his guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring for his offering a goat, a female without blemish, for his sins which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill the sin offering in the place of burnt offering. And the priest shall take some of its blood in his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering and pour out the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove as the fat is removed from the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. All right. Well, Cain is similar to the grain offering. Abel's sounds much like the sin offering of the animal and its fat. Leviticus 14 also calls for the offering of the first fruits of the harvest. What information does Hebrews 11? Let's go there. Okay, Hebrews 11, verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a more accepting sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he dies, he still speaks. So what does this tell us? That Abel's offering his sacrifice in faith, testifying of his righteousness. So in other words, implying, what about Cain? He didn't what? With his offering. Don't give me those blank stares. If Abel offered his in faith, Cain didn't. All right. Good. How is Cain described in the first epistle of John, chapter 3? Gives us practice in finding these little books, right? Verses 10 to 12. So first epistle of John, chapter 3, starting at verse 10. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteousness. Okay? So Cain was of the evil one, a child of the devil, and his deeds were evil. Okay? He's that bad brother. How many of you had a bad brother? Oh, you were. You were. My brother, I don't know if he was bad, but I never got along, because my brother was like 6 years older than I, so, he always picked on me, I think, But now we're okay, he's 80 and I'm 75, and so we're okay now. All right, what do the following passages tell you about God's attitude toward sacrifices? All right, let's go to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and listen than the fat of rams. And that gives you an indication of what this is all about. And we don't need to look at the others because they're all about the same thing. All of these point to God's desire for a pure heart rather than sacrifices, right? How many times in the scriptures does God say, I don't want your sacrifices. I want you. I want your heart. I still remember in my parish in Iowa, and I've probably told you this story before, but you can hear it again. See, that's a sign of old age, when you keep repeating stories, and people still laugh at them. I got this is another little rabbit trail. I did a stewardship series when I first went to Iowa, and I was there 7 years. About 5 years later, I repeated that sermon series, and no one remembered. It was the same sermons. They didn't remember. And I had all kind of stories and jokes and stuff in there. Okay, but anyway, I visited all of my members, and I had them come in and we had visits. I had this one couple who hadn't been in church for 10 years, but they did come in for to visit with me, and of course I was talking to them about church and fellowship and being involved in worship, and the guy says, Pastor, I send my offering in every December. And I finally told him, I said, you don't need to do that. Because God doesn't want your money. He wants you. Yeah. Which is really true, isn't it? He wants us. All of these point to God's desire for a pure heart rather than sacrifices. While God is pleased with sacrifices offered rightly, if they are done with the wrong motives, they are rejected. That's even like, with us in our church, today. If we, we got the faithfully forward thing, people giving that's great. But if they're doing it for the wrong reasons, God doesn't need that. And, that's what we got to convey to our people. We want to give rightly, that kind of thing. In summary, describe why God accepted Abel and his sacrifice and not Cain's. Although many people think that God did not accept Cain's sacrifice because it was not a blood sacrifice, the Bible does not clearly teach that. From the text of Genesis 4 and the other verses we have looked at, it seems that Cain's attitude toward the sacrifice was the reason it was rejected. God commands the offering of grain and drink offerings later, so these offerings are not inherently wrong. It is important to note that Abel's offering is described as coming from the firstborn, while Cain is not described as the first fruits. This could be a clue to the acceptance and attitude. Cain brought just some fruit, while Abel brought the first and the best of his flock. God also told Cain that he would be accepted if he did well. So his attitude, not his offering, seems to be the emphasis. Ultimately, it is the heart attitude that God looks at, not the offering itself. Just as the wrong offering with the right attitude is unacceptable, the right offering with the wrong attitude is also unacceptable. That's just good old common sense. Tells you that, it's from the heart, that right attitude kind of thing. All right, well, it must be changing topics here, okay? So, that's the answer, and that's the answer to where Cain got his wife. Some people just never expect to get the answer to that question, all right? Kind of an abrupt change. Any thoughts or before we go on to the next section? Anything else that you want to comments or thoughts about Cain and Abel? Anything else there that you want to talk? Yes, Vicar.
I tend to follow the second opinion that it's about Cain's attitude.
Okay.
Because it's very exemplified in his response to God. His response to God is so truculent. How do you say that to God? Am I brother's keeper? I mean, that's indicative of somebody who doesn't understand the relationship.
They learned well from their parents, didn't they? It was that woman you made that you brought to me, right? It was that serpent, how well they learned and how quickly. Other thoughts here? Yeah, Art.
The one passage that was up the Hosea 6.
Yeah.
Verse 6 says it well, for I desire love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings.
Yeah.
God wants this intimate relationship with us. Not that our offerings can't be pleasing to Him,
Yeah.
but they will not be pleasing to Him. If we come to the altar with evil thoughts, if we have a hatred for one of our fellow man.
Yeah. Because he even uses that kind of attitude thing in reference to our taking Holy Communion too, right? He says if you go to the altar and you're harboring something, leave your gift at the altar and then go and rectify that, that first. Yeah. Attitude's a big thing, isn't it? Think about that in terms of our children. Don't you think sometimes that your children had an attitude? They had an attitude and need to change that attitude kind of thing, the same thing. Anything else? I didn't mean to rush this, kind of thing. All right. Well, where did Cain find a wife? Right? Another common challenge to the biblical history of man has to do with Cain and what we read in Genesis chapter 4, verses 16 to 17. And let's look at that. Okay? Go back to Genesis. And looking at verses 16 to 17. So this is after Cain has been cursed. And so now it says in verse 17, or look in verse 16, it says, Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. All right? People often ask where Cain got his wife, if Adam and Eve were the original parents of humanity. And it's a good question. It really is, So we already read that, and let's try to see the answers. Where do these events take place? Verses 16 and 17. Location? Yeah. Just after God had cursed and marked Cain, and Cain leaves the area and goes and settles. He settles in the land of Nod, east of Eden. I had to think about this when I was reading it. How those areas get named. I don't have an answer for this, but it is just a thought. There were already locations, that had designations, kind of thing. Interesting. According to the text, where did Cain marry his wife?
That's a trick question.
Trick question?
Yeah, it doesn't say Mary.
Well, it just says his wife, okay? Okay, I didn't mean it in that sense. Okay. But that's why he's such a sharp vicar. See, vicars are that sharp. Isn't that right, Chris? Vicars are sharp. Yeah, yeah. The text doesn't say where they were married. Okay? Doesn't say where they were married. In other words, people are asking, well, did he find someone in the land of Nod? Okay? Or was it back? Doesn't say. All right? Doesn't say. But many people assume that Cain went to Nod and found a wife in Nod. Not necessarily. Could already had her back where he was. All right? You understand? Now, what two things did Cain do in Nod? Had a son, built a city. Are there any people in the land of Nod?
Build a city, there's gotta be.
Well, there's nothing in the text that would suggest that there were already people in Nod. Okay? It's just that he goes. You know? That he goes. All right? To this point in the Bible, how many people have been identified? Okay? How many people have been identified? We have 4. We have Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. Right? Now, if Adam and Eve were the parents of every human, how was Cain related to his wife? What are the possibilities?
Brother, sister?
Could be a sister. Could be a niece. Okay? But you know what it couldn't have been? Could have been a sister. Could have been a niece. But not a cousin. Because to be a cousin, what do you have? I think I might be getting this all wrong, but think about this. Because Cain and Abel, or Adam and Eve are married. They have kids.
50-foot woman on Monday.
How is it? Help me out here.
Well, and on Monday.
Yes.
Monday.
And they didn't have any of that. Thank you. Take the librarian. You know? Yeah. Okay. Well, she must have been a sister or possibly a niece. Okay? Could Cain have married a cousin? Here we go. I knew it was in there. No, since his parents did not have any brothers or sisters. Okay? So how does Genesis chapter 5, verse 4 give us more insight? And it says, the days of Adam, after he fathered Seth, were 800 years, and what? He had other sons and daughters. Okay? So, Cain, Abel, and Seth were not the only children of Adam and Eve. If Adam and Eve did not have any daughters, humanity would not have continued. See? So, sisters, nieces. Okay? Cain is described as the first son of Adam and Eve, but Genesis 5:4 tells us that there were also other children. We are not told the order or names of any of those children except for Seth, but we know that they must have been born. It may sound a little funny to the modern ears, but Cain married either a sister or a niece. Could have been a nurse too. Or some other close relative. Okay? Rather than going to Nod and finding a wife there, he likely already had a wife and took her with him to Nod. And this is consistent with what the text actually says. Well, what are the immediate objections to this idea that come to your mind? Of marrying your sister or your niece or nephew or your brother?
Incest.
Incest. It's kind of revolting, right? Some may suggest it is gross or wrong, but some may point to the prohibition against the marrying close relations that are found in Leviticus. And that's what Leviticus 18 says. It says, you don't marry those real close ones, all right? This prohibition came, notice, 2,500 years after creation. That's when the prohibition came. And that Abraham himself married his half-sister. And Isaac married a close cousin, right? Okay? Why might it have been acceptable for close relatives to marry in the beginning? Yes, Vicar.
I think the more relevant question here is how do you explain the genetics?
How do you what?
Explain the genetics.
That's
Because
coming.
we know that with inbreeding comes recessive genes and problems related to that.
Yep.
We see it in European royalty.
Well, and there's a,
Genetic code was so new that it didn't, it didn't have time to.
Because of lack of flaws kind of thing.
well, they talk about nowadays of genetic overload, right? Genetic overload is what you see. And we're going to see that, through that. Why might it have been acceptable for close relatives to marry in the beginning? Well, think of the condition of the original creation compared to now. One of the dangers today comes from genetic disorders that can result from close marriages. And we have all seen evidence of that, right? That kind of stuff happening. Like the vicar said, all those royalties, and bad stuff coming out of the result of it. Okay. Many Christians suggest that there were other people groups already in Nod, groups that God either had created or allowed to evolve, and that Cain went there and looked and took a wife from among them. But looking at Genesis 4:14, we read that Cain was afraid that anyone would kill him if they found him. So it must have been his family that Cain was afraid of, not some other tribe or people who lived in another area. Why would another group want to kill Cain for killing someone they didn't even know?
How would they know he killed him?
How would they know? Yeah. So it was his own family that he was afraid of. It just doesn't make sense with the text. Okay? And let's get to a video.
Find it. So. Is it on your?
I have it on my flash drive. But it doesn't want to play it.
Well, if we can't get it to work, maybe we can act it out. It's quite a large file.
Yeah.
Let me try one thing.
No, I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, have you done any of the DNA tests?
Oh, no. Have you?
Yeah.
Or you just-
I found, I've got four that I don't think even are.
Yeah.
The funny thing is why
See, YouTube knows that we're not supposed to be showing this. So that's probably, YouTube is probably doing this. They're probably blocking it. They don't want us to show this video on online. It looks like maybe somehow the file got corrupted.
Yeah,
Am I transferring it? Okay.
large files sometimes on thumb drives.
Yeah. No, let's just go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. We'll work on it, and if, we'll try it again next week with that, but we'll go ahead and finish up here. And the video was by Ken Ham, and just kind of, reaffirming what we've been talking about in terms of, who did Cain marry and things like that. I'm sorry that we can't show that. All right. All right. Well, it's sad to think that within the first generation from Adam and Eve, someone was murdered. Sin's impact was so devastating that Cain was willing to kill his own brother out of jealousy over an act of worshiping God. Both brothers had brought offerings, but Cain's heart was not right in his offering. Despite God's direct appeal to not allow sin to overtake him, Cain killed his brother and then tried to deny that he knew what had happened. Not unlike his parents, sin caused him to attempt to shift God's attention away from his own sin. But God, who is rich in mercy, did not punish Cain with death, but allowed him to live and even have a family. Like Cain, we can expect consequences for our sin, but because of what Christ has done on the cross, we don't have to fear the ultimate punishment of an eternity in hell. When we repent and place our trust in Christ, we have a sacrifice that is completely accepted by the Father. It is no longer our sin and wickedness that God sees when he looks at us, but the perfect merit of Jesus. We are free to serve him knowing that he has given us a new heart. What is the sin's pattern? Let's go to James chapter 1. And you're probably familiar with these words. And we're looking at verses 13 to 15. And we want to see how does sin's pattern found here compare to what we see in the account of Cain, and how can that help us understand why we sin and how to avoid it. And it says this: let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desires, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Okay, how does that compare with the pattern that we see in the Genesis account, as we see here in James? Do you see any pattern? What did God warn Cain of? About sin? Where is it? It's crouching at the door of your heart. What do we see here in James?
Yeah, when it is fully grown,
Yeah. He says what?
brings forth death.
Says each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires, right? And then what do those desires do? They conceive and birth sin. It's that whole idea, and I know all of you have been there. You know, and we had this in a sermon, right, not too long ago. Temptation is not a sin. Yeah, temptation is not a sin. It's what you do with the temptation. The temptation is there, and then what does sin do? When sin starts, or when we start dwelling on it, right, and it gives birth to that. And how many times have you and I been there? Well, it's okay to do this just once.
Yeah.
You know? Well, maybe once and a half. Well, maybe twice. And boom, there it is, right? You know? Yes, sir.
It's just like in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is talking about the Ten Commandments. He says, "You heard it said, you shall not kill. But I say to you," he's going way back to the beginning, before killing, that, even if you hate your brother, you have already murdered him in your heart.
Yeah, and it goes through that kind of thing. Well, Cain's jealousy of his brother's acceptance, a sinful desire led him to kill his brother despite a warning directly from God to master it. We should recognize our sinful desires and put them to death before they are fully grown and lead us to sin against God. I think it was in Pastor Allersmeyer's class where he talked about that, and it's in that Corinthian passage, and maybe Pastor Kennedy mentioned it too, that God will provide a means of escape. But what you need to understand, people, is that the escape is there, but we may not take it. Do you understand what I mean? The escape is there, but we may not take advantage of it. That's what our sinful desire does. And that's hard. So we can never say, "God, you did it to me." It's your fault. It's our fault, every time. Okay, Abel offered the firstborn of his flock, and everything else we see the idea of God's honoring the first fruits offered to him. How can we apply this idea to our offerings to God today? So what do we give God? Do we give him a tip? Or do we give him our heart? And let's be honest, right now, we have, all of us have received the letter from the church, right? About Faithful Forward. And, we each weigh our hearts right now, as we decide. And we ask God to give us guidance and whatnot. Do we keep the same or do we change? That kind of thing. But whatever we give, do we give him our best? Art?
Wouldn't it be a blessing if by the end of this year, that entire debt was wiped out? It's a lot.
Not only would it be a blessing, but you know what? It is even a possibility. God has given this congregation everything it needs to retire that debt. And that doesn't mean that you have to live without. He doesn't expect you to become destitute. You know what I mean? But our congregation has that possibility. And we'll go from there. Whether it's our time, money, or talents, we should give God the first and the best of what he has given to us. Proverbs 3:9 tells us to honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of your produce. How does the mercy shown to Cain relate to the mercy shown to us through Christ? Even though Cain deserved to die for killing his brother, God was merciful to him. Each of us has sinned against God and deserves to die for that rebellion against a perfect and holy God. But God has shown mercy to us in sending Christ to die in our place.
No.
And thus saith the Lord. Okay? See, we didn't need that old video anyway, right? Kind of thing. But thank you for your input, and we'll continue next week. Art?
Should we bring these back next time, or you want to collect them? Are we finished with these?
We're done. We're done with that. You know, we're done with that. Okay. Have a good day. You know, have a good.